The first thing I noticed wasn't the dress. It was the way Kira hung it up afterward, like it mattered more than everything else in the closet. Black silk, tags still attached from some boutique I'd never heard of. Price point that made my consulting fees look modest. New client dinner, she said, not looking at me while she arranged it on the special hangers, the ones she'd ordered online last month. I'm Beck Darren, and I fix computer networks for a living. 20 years of troubleshooting has taught me that patterns matter more than explanations. Systems fail in predictable ways, and people aren't much different. The dress was Tuesday. Wednesday brought shoes that cost more than my monthly car payment. Thursday, a makeup session that started at 5 and ended when I was already asleep. Friday, she came home at 2:17 a.m., keys hitting the granite counter with that particular metallic ping that means someone's trying to be quiet but failing. How was the client dinner? I asked over coffee the next morning. Exhausting. You know how these marketing campaigns are. Everything has to be perfect. She stirred sugar into her cup with mechanical precision. I might need to do more of these. Building relationships takes time. I nodded and returned to my laptop. 3 decades of marriage teaches you when to push and when to wait. My screen showed our joint checking account, and I made mental notes about recent charges. The pattern was forming, clear as diagnostic code. Kira worked for Hartwell Marketing, mid-level account manager, with aspirations that outpaced her current salary. She'd been there 8 years, climbing steadily, but never quite reaching the executive level she wanted. Lately, she'd been talking about networking opportunities and investing in her professional image. The dresses multiplied. Black silk became navy blue, became emerald green. Each one hung with religious care, each one worn once and then treated like a museum piece. The makeup sessions extended. The dinners grew later. I'm building something here, Beck, she said one evening, applying lipstick in the hallway mirror. This could be my breakthrough year. I watched her transform. The woman who used to wear yoga pants to the grocery store now looked like she belonged in magazine spreads. Every detail calculated, every angle considered. Who's the client? I asked. Linton Ventures. They're looking at a major campaign launch. She checked her reflection one final time. Jazz Linton himself is handling the preliminary meetings. Jazz. I filed the name away and went back to my network diagnostics. The 2 a.m. arrivals became routine. Kira would slip in through this garage, heels clicking against concrete, then pause in the kitchen for exactly 3 minutes. I timed it from bed, listening to the soft sounds of someone trying not to wake a sleeping spouse. She'd shower afterward, always. The water would run for 20 minutes, steam fogging the bathroom windows, and she'd emerge smelling like expensive soap instead of whatever restaurant she claimed to have visited. How's the Linton project coming? I asked one morning. Slow progress. These venture capital types are very particular about their brand image. She poured coffee with steady hands. Jazz has very specific ideas about how the campaign should develop. Jazz again. I opened my laptop and did what any IT consultant does when patterns emerge. I started gathering data. Linton Ventures had a website full of sleek photos and vague descriptions of disruptive innovation. Jazz Linton's bio showed a 42-year-old venture capitalist with an MBA from somewhere expensive and a smile that belonged in toothpaste commercials. His LinkedIn profile mentioned recent investments in tech startups and sustainable energy projects. I cross-referenced his company's public filings with Hartwell Marketing's client roster. No mention of any active contracts. That evening, Kira emerged from another transformation session, wearing the emerald green dress and shoes that added 4 inches to her height. Another Linton meeting? I asked. Strategy session. We're finalizing the creative direction. She grabbed her purse and checked her phone. Don't wait up. These sessions can run very late. I waited exactly 30 minutes after her car left the driveway, then opened my laptop and logged into our cellular account. Family plans have their advantages when you need to track movement patterns. Kira's phone had traveled downtown, but not to any restaurant district. The GPS coordinates led to the Grandview Hotel, a luxury establishment that catered to business travelers, with expense accounts that dwarfed mine. I sat in our living room, surrounded by the accumulated evidence of 20 years of marriage, and felt something shift in my chest. Not anger exactly, more like the satisfaction a technician feels when a diagnostic finally reveals the source of system corruption. The next morning, I canceled our streaming services, all of them. Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, even the premium cable package Kira had insisted we needed for her research. The internet's acting weird, I told her when she asked about the missing channels. I'm troubleshooting the whole system. Might take a few days. She accepted this explanation because it fit my professional expertise. IT consultants are expected to have complicated technical problems that require extended solutions. 3 days later, I canceled her credit cards. Fraud protection, I explained, when she discovered them, declined at her usual lunch spot. Someone tried to use our information online. The bank recommended temporary suspension while they investigate. This required more elaborate explanation, but Kira's understanding of financial security was limited enough that she accepted my technical-sounding justifications. The interesting thing about cutting off resources is how it reveals dependency patterns. Kira had grown accustomed to a certain level of financial freedom, and its sudden absence created stress fractures in her carefully maintained routine. She started paying cash for things. This meant trips to the bank, withdrawal patterns I could track through our joint account statements. 200 here, 300 there, always in amounts just below the threshold that would trigger automatic notifications. But cash has limitations. You can't book luxury hotel rooms with cash. You can't maintain the kind of professional image Kira had been cultivating without credit cards and online payment systems. When will the fraud investigation be finished? She asked one evening, checking her phone with increasing frequency. These things take time. Banking security is very thorough. I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been monitoring our account activity. Is there something urgent you need to purchase? Just normal expenses. Work clothes, professional development. She set her phone down with careful precision. Maybe I should open my own account. For business purposes. That's a great idea. Complete financial independence. She looked at me strangely, as if my agreement wasn't the response she'd expected. The next week brought new patterns. Kira's phone traveled to different locations: a downtown bank, a boutique financial advisor, a luxury car dealership. She was building infrastructure for a life that didn't include shared resources. I found the paperwork on a Thursday. Mortgage refinancing documents, hidden in her jewelry box like love letters from a secret admirer. The application requested a cash-out refinance that would have extracted $60,000 from our home equity. The signature was a decent forgery, but I'd been signing my name for 38 years. The spacing was wrong, and she'd made the K in Beck too angular. Details matter in my profession. I photographed every page, then returned them to their hiding place. The application was dated 2 weeks ago, which meant she'd been planning this financial separation longer than I'd suspected. That evening, Kira announced another late strategy session with Jazz Linton. This project is really developing momentum, she said, applying makeup with the precision of a portrait artist. Jazz thinks we might be looking at a long-term partnership. Sounds promising. What kind of timeline are we talking about? Could be months, maybe longer. These venture capital relationships require sustained attention. She left at 7:30, and I waited until 8 before beginning my own investigation. The Grandview Hotel's website showed room availability and pricing. Their luxury suites started at $400 per night, with packages that included spa services and private dining. I called the front desk. I'm trying to reach my wife, Kira Darren. She's meeting with a client in one of your suites tonight. I'm sorry, sir, but we can't provide information about our guests. Of course. Could you connect me to Jazz Linton's room? I believe they're meeting there. A pause. I don't show anyone by that name registered tonight. Maybe it's under his company name? Linton Ventures? Another pause, longer this time. Sir, I can't provide details about our reservations, but I don't show any corporate bookings under that name. I thanked them and hung up. Then I drove downtown. The Grandview Hotel occupied a full city block, its glass facade reflecting streetlights like a mirror designed to hide secrets. The parking garage required a key card for access, but the street level offered clear views of the lobby through floor-to-ceiling windows. I found a coffee shop across the street and settled in with a laptop and a clear view of the hotel entrance. The barista was a college student who didn't question customers, who lingered over single drinks for hours. At 9:47 p.m., Kira emerged from the hotel lobby. She wasn't alone. Jazz Linton looked exactly like his LinkedIn photo, except his smile was directed at my wife instead of a camera. He wore a suit that probably cost more than my monthly income, and he moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. They stood close together under the hotel's entrance lighting, and their body language told a story that had nothing to do with business strategy sessions. His hand rested on the small of her back. She leaned into him when she laughed. They kissed goodbye like people who had been practicing. I took photos with my phone's camera, using the zoom function to capture clear images of both faces. Then, I watched Jazz help Kira into a Tesla that definitely wasn't part of Hartwell Marketing's company fleet. The drive home took 15 minutes. I spent that time thinking about patterns, about system failures, and about the difference between problems that can be fixed and problems that require complete replacement. Kira arrived home at 2:23 a.m., following her established routine. Garage door, 3 minutes in the kitchen, 20-minute shower. I listened from bed, timing each phase and thinking about the mortgage documents hidden in her jewelry box. The next morning, I made coffee and waited. "How was the strategy session?" I asked when she appeared in the kitchen. "Productive. Jazz has some really innovative ideas about brand development." She poured coffee with steady hands. "We made significant progress on the campaign framework." "That's wonderful. When do you think you'll be ready to present to his team?" A brief pause. "Soon. These things take time to develop properly." I nodded and opened my laptop. The photos from last night were already uploaded to a secure folder, along with the images of the mortgage documents and a detailed timeline of her recent activities. "I've been thinking about our financial situation," I said, not looking up from the screen. "Maybe it's time to review our joint accounts. Make sure everything's properly organized." "What do you mean?" "Just standard maintenance. Making sure all our legal documents are current, signatures up to date, that sort of thing." She set her coffee cup down with a slight tremor. "Is there some kind of problem?" "Not a problem, just due diligence. You know how careful I am about documentation." That afternoon, I called our mortgage company. "I need to verify some recent activity on our account," I told the customer service representative. "My wife mentioned something about a refinancing application." "Let me check your account, Mr. Darren." Keyboard sounds in the background. "I do show a recent application, but it's currently under review. There seems to be some question about the signature verification." "What kind of question?" "Our fraud department flagged it for manual review. Standard procedure when signatures don't match our records exactly." I thanked them and hung up. Then, I opened our prenuptial agreement, a document we'd signed 20 years ago when Kira inherited a small trust fund from her grandmother. The language was standard for its time, but one clause had always struck me as oddly specific. Section 12 the C stated that unilateral attempts to encumber jointly held property would trigger immediate separation of shared financial obligations, with the attempting party assuming full responsibility for any resulting penalties or fees. My lawyer had insisted on that clause after handling a particularly messy divorce case. At the time, it seemed like unnecessary paranoia. Now, it looked like prescient planning. I made copies of everything: the photos, the mortgage documents, the bank records showing Kira's cash withdrawal patterns, and a detailed timeline of her activities over the past 2 months. Then I drove to my sister Rena's law office. Rena Darren had been a paralegal for 15 years, and she understood family law the way I understood network architecture. She reviewed my documentation with professional detachment, asking clarifying questions and taking notes. "This is pretty comprehensive," she said finally. "What exactly are you planning to do with it?" "I'm not sure yet. I just want to understand my options." "Well, the mortgage fraud is clear-cut. The bank will reject the application, and there could be legal consequences for the forged signature." She flipped through the photos. "The affair is obviously grounds for divorce, if that's the direction you want to go." "What about the prenup clause?" "That's interesting. If you can prove she attempted to unilaterally refinance, You could legally stop paying for shared expenses, utilities, insurance, credit cards, everything. She looked up from the documents. It would essentially force her to become financially independent immediately. How immediately? As soon as you provide written notice and documentation of the violation. The clause is pretty ironclad. I drove home thinking about timing. Kira had another strategy session scheduled for that evening, which meant I had several hours to prepare. At 6 o'clock, she emerged from her transformation ritual wearing a new dress I'd never seen before. Deep blue silk that probably cost more than my weekly income. Another productive evening ahead? I asked. Jazz wants to finalize the creative brief tonight. We're getting close to a breakthrough. She checked her reflection in the hallway mirror. This could really change everything for me professionally. I'm sure it will change everything. She left at 7:15, and I began implementing what I'd started thinking of as my own strategy session. First, I drafted a formal notice letter, citing Section 12C of our prenuptial agreement. The language was precise and legally sound, referencing the attempted mortgage fraud and invoking immediate separation of shared financial obligations. Second, I gathered copies of all relevant documents, bank statements, credit card records, insurance policies, and utility accounts. Everything that connected Kira's name to my financial responsibility. Third, I created a comprehensive digital archive of evidence, stored in multiple locations with automatic backup systems. IT consultants understand the importance of redundant data protection. By the time Kira returned at 2:31 a.m., I had everything prepared. I listened to her standard routine from bed, timing each phase and thinking about system failures that cascade through interconnected networks. The next morning, I served her coffee along with the notice letter. "What's this?" she asked, scanning the formal language with increasing alarm. "Legal notice regarding violation of our prenuptial agreement, specifically Section 12C concerning unilateral property encumbrance." Her face went through several color changes as she read. "Beck, I can explain." "No explanation necessary. The documentation is quite clear." I gestured toward the folder of evidence sitting on the counter. Attempted mortgage fraud, forged signatures, unauthorized financial activity, all very well documented. You've been spying on me? I've been protecting our shared assets from fraudulent activity. There's a difference. She set the letter down with shaking hands. This is insane. You can't just cut off all our accounts because of some paperwork mistake. I'm not cutting off our accounts. I'm separating my financial obligations from your independent activities. As of today, you're responsible for your own expenses. What does that mean exactly? It means your credit cards are canceled. Your access to our joint accounts is suspended. Your car insurance, health insurance, and phone service will be discontinued unless you arrange independent coverage. The silence stretched between us like a fault line opening in the earth. "You can't do this," she said finally. "Actually, I can, and I have." I opened my laptop and showed her the screen. "Everything was processed this morning. You have 30 days to establish independent financial arrangements." "Beck, please, let's talk about this reasonably." "I've been very reasonable. I didn't report the mortgage fraud to the authorities. I didn't contact your employer about your fictional client meetings. I simply exercised my legal rights under our existing agreement." She stared at the notice letter as if it might change its contents through force of will. "What about Jazz?" she asked quietly. "What about him? I mean, what do you know about Jazz?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. "I know he drives a Tesla. I know he's not actually a client of Hartwell Marketing. I know he's been helping you spend money you don't have on a lifestyle you can't afford." Her face crumpled. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to document everything thoroughly. Which reminds me, you should probably call him. Let him know about your new financial situation." That evening, Kira's phone rang constantly. I could hear her side of increasingly frantic conversations as she tried to explain her sudden lack of resources to someone who clearly wasn't prepared for this development. "No, I can't just put it on the card because the cards are canceled. I don't know how long. He has legal grounds." Around 10 o'clock, her phone went quiet. She sat in the living room, staring at the wall with the expression of someone whose carefully constructed world had just collapsed. "What happens now?" she asked. Now you figure out how to pay for your own life, I said. Just like you've been planning to do anyway. The first crack in Kira's new reality appeared at the bank. I watched from my home office window as she returned from what should have been a simple errand, her face carrying the particular strain that comes from discovering your financial options are more limited than expected. That they won't give me a personal account without a credit check, she announced, dropping her purse on the kitchen counter with unnecessary force. Apparently, having no independent credit history is a problem. I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been monitoring the systematic disconnection of services. That seems reasonable. Banks like to know their customers can manage money responsibly. I've been managing money just fine. You've been spending money just fine. There's a difference. She opened the refrigerator, stared at its contents for 30 seconds, then closed it without taking anything. The gesture reminded me of someone checking for network connectivity when they already know the connection is down. How long are you planning to maintain this situation? She asked. I'm not maintaining anything. You created this situation when you decided to forge my signature on mortgage documents. I'm just responding to it. That was a mistake. I was trying to surprise you with some renovations. I saved my work and closed the laptop. Kira, I've seen the hotel receipts. I've seen the photos. I've tracked your phone to locations that have nothing to do with home renovations or client meetings. Her face went through the same color changes I'd observed the previous morning. You've been tracking my phone? Family plan, location services. You agreed to it 3 years ago when we upgraded our coverage. That's invasion of privacy. That's standard account management. The same way monitoring our credit reports is standard financial security. She sat down across from me with the careful movements of someone trying not to break something fragile. What do you want, Beck? What will it take to fix this? I don't want anything. And there's nothing to fix. This is just the natural consequence of choices you've been making for months. So what? You're just going to destroy our marriage over some misunderstanding? I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply declining to finance your affair. The word hung in the air between us, like smoke from an electrical fire. Once it's visible, you can't pretend the system isn't overheating. It's not an affair, she said quietly. What would you call it? It's complicated. Jazz and I have a professional relationship that's developed into something more personal. How much more personal? She stared at her hands. We've been seeing each other for about 3 months. Seeing each other? Is that what we're calling it? Beck, please. I know how this looks, but it's not what you think. I reopened my laptop and pulled up the folder of documentation. Let me show you what I think. The photos appeared on screen in chronological order. Kira and Jazz entering the hotel, Kira and Jazz in his Tesla, Kira and Jazz kissing under the hotel entrance lighting. Each image time-stamped and geotagged with metadata that would satisfy any court's evidence requirements. This is what I think, I said. I think you've been using our joint resources to finance a relationship with someone who has enough money to make you feel like you deserve a more expensive lifestyle. That's not fair. What's not fair is forging my signature to steal equity from our home. What's not fair is lying about client meetings while you're actually in hotel rooms with your boyfriend. She closed her eyes. Jazz isn't my boyfriend. What is he? He's someone who understands my potential. Someone who sees what I could become if I had the right opportunities. And what opportunities are those? Business opportunities. Investment opportunities. Jazz has connections in venture capital. He's been helping me develop a consulting practice. I pulled up another folder on my laptop. Is that what you call the shell company you've been running money through? Consulting practice? Her eyes opened. How do you know about that? Bank records, cross-referenced with business filings. You've been cycling cash through something called Premier Event Solutions for 6 weeks. Very creative money laundering for someone with no business experience. It's not money laundering, it's legitimate business development. Show me the business plan. What? If you're developing a consulting practice, you must have a business plan. Client projections, revenue models, operational structure. Show me the documentation. She stared at me as if I'd asked her to explain quantum physics. It's still in development. Of course it is. That afternoon, I received a call from Hartwell Marketing's Human Resources Department. Mr. Darren, this is Marcia Chen from HR. I'm calling about some concerns regarding your wife's recent activities. What kind of concern? Well, we've received some information suggesting that Kira may have been using company resources for personal business development. I was hoping you might have some insight into her recent projects. I thought about the shell company, the hotel receipts, and the fictional client meetings. What kind of information? Anonymous tip about potential conflicts of interest. Unauthorized use of company contacts, that sort of thing. I see. Have you spoken with Kira about this? We've scheduled a meeting for tomorrow morning. I was just hoping to get some context before we sit down with her. I'm afraid I don't have much insight into her professional activities. You'd have to ask her directly. Of course. Thank you for your time. I hung up and immediately called Kira's direct line. Hartwell Marketing, this is Kira. It's Beck. HR just called me. A pause. What did they want? They wanted to discuss your recent business development activities. Apparently, someone provided them with information about potential conflicts of interest. What kind of information? The kind that suggests you've been using company resources for personal projects. They want to meet with you tomorrow morning. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Kira? I'm here. This is really bad timing. Why? What's happening? Jazz and I were supposed to finalize some investment details tomorrow. If I'm stuck in HR meetings, maybe you should focus on keeping your actual job before you worry about your imaginary consulting practice. It's not imaginary. Jazz has real money to invest. This could be my chance to become financially independent. How much real money? Enough to change everything. Enough to make all of this worthwhile. I thought about the Tesla, the hotel rooms, and the expensive lifestyle Jazz had been displaying. Have you actually seen this money? Bank statements, investment accounts, anything concrete? Of course I have. Jazz isn't some random guy. He's a successful venture capitalist. Show me his portfolio. What? If he's a successful venture capitalist, he must have a track record. Show me his investment portfolio, his fund performance, his client list. Another long pause. I don't have access to that level of detail. Why not? If you're considering a business partnership, you should have complete financial transparency. It doesn't work that way. These kinds of relationships are built on trust. No, Kira. These kinds of relationships are built on documentation. Trust is what you verify with evidence. That evening, I did my own research into Jazz Linton's business credentials. Linton Ventures had a professional website, but the portfolio section contained only generic stock photos and vague descriptions of disruptive innovation. The company's business registration showed it had been active for less than 2 years, with no public filings indicating significant investment activity. Jazz's LinkedIn profile listed several previous positions at investment firms. But when I cross-referenced those companies, none of them had any record of his employment. His educational credentials checked out, MBA from a legitimate university, but his professional experience appeared to be largely fictional. I was documenting these findings when Kira returned from her evening with Jazz. She looked different somehow, less polished than usual, as if her transformation routine hadn't quite achieved its intended effect. How was your strategy session? I asked. Fine. We discussed some contingency planning. She sat down across from me without removing her coat. Beck, I need to ask you something. What? If I can prove that my business development activities are legitimate, would you consider reversing the financial separation? Define legitimate. Real investment capital, actual business contracts, documented revenue projections. I consider this. If you can provide the same level of documentation I've been gathering about your recent activities, we could discuss it. What kind of documentation? Bank statements showing actual investment funds, signed contracts with real clients, business registration documents, tax filings, the standard evidence that any legitimate business would generate. She nodded slowly. How long would I have to gather this information? How long do you think you need? A week, maybe 2. That seems reasonable. But Kira? Yes? The documentation has to be genuine. No more forged signatures, no more shell companies, no more fictional client relationships. Of course. And if you can't provide legitimate documentation, then we proceed with permanent financial separation and discuss divorce terms. She stared at me for a long moment. You're really serious about this. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. The next morning, Kira left for her HR meeting wearing the most conservative outfit I'd seen her in for months. Navy blue suit, minimal makeup, the kind of professional appearance that suggested someone trying to project competence rather than attraction. She returned 3 hours later with the expression of someone whose carefully constructed narrative had just encountered objective reality. How did it go? I asked. They're conducting a full investigation into my recent activities. Someone provided them with detailed information about my phone usage, expense reports, and client contact logs. What kind of information? The kind that shows I've been lying about almost everything for the past 3 months. She sat down at the kitchen table and put her head in her hands. They know about the hotel meetings. They know about the fake client reports. They know about the shell company. How do they know about the shell company? Anonymous tip. Someone sent them copies of bank records and business filings. I thought about the various people who might have access to that information. Any idea who might have provided those details? Could have been anyone. Jazz has business associates who might not approve of his personal relationships. Or maybe someone at the bank noticed the unusual transaction patterns. What did you tell HR? The truth. That I've been developing a side business and may have used poor judgment in managing the boundaries between personal and professional activities. And what did they say? They're reviewing my employment status. I'll know by